Expats, tourists and even retirees are leaving Thailand at an alarming rate, and a lot of them are not planning on returning. They have either had enough of Thailand as a whole and gone back to their own country, or they have gone to neighbouring countries like Vietnam or the Philippines. If you have spent time in Thailand over the years, you've probably noticed that things aren't quite the same anymore. The crowds are smaller, the prices are higher, and the whole feeling of being there, it's just not there anymore. For a long time, Thailand was the go-to place for both tourists and expats. It was cheap, fun, easy, and welcoming. But lately, a lot of people are starting to rethink it. Flights are expensive, visas are getting tougher, and more tourists are just giving up on the place. Even some long-term expats who once swore they'd stay here until the end of time are packing up and leaving. This video isn't about hating on Thailand, it's about being real. The country's still amazing in so many ways. The food, the people, the culture, the weather. But there's no denying that things have shifted since the lockdown a few years back. Costs are climbing up, policies are changing, and the easygoing land of smiles feeling has gotten a bit more complicated. I've broke down my point of view, why I think people have given up on Thailand, from inflation and taxes to scams and safety concerns, and immigration headaches. We'll look at why tourists are skipping Thailand, why expats are leaving, and what might need to change for things to turn around. Let's begin with the rising costs. Every time I come back to Thailand, I notice the prices going up, and at a noticeable rate. It used to be one of those places where your money went a long way. Cheap meals, decent hotels, and a good time without worrying too much about what you spend. Now, it feels like everything costs more each time. You don't really notice it day to day, but by the end of the week, when you compare it to previous trips, you can really see it. These days, the value just isn't there like it used to be. A beer that cost 60 baht not long ago is now over 100 in some bars. Street food portions feel smaller, and even budget hotels charge what mid-range ones used to. It's not just inflation either. The service and quality haven't improved to match the prices, so a lot of people leave feeling ripped off. You still get people saying Thailand is cheap, but that's mostly compared to the West. When you're here for weeks or months, or even live here, the difference adds up fast. The value for money tag that used to attract millions of backpackers and retirees is slowly fading. Many tourists I talk to mention they could get the same experience in places like Vietnam or the Philippines for less money. Some even say Bali feels cheaper now, which would have sounded ridiculous a few years back. Pattaya, especially, has priced itself out of the fun and crazy image that it actually built its name on. Tourists come expecting the Thailand of 10 years ago. It's still a beautiful country, but I've met guys who've been visiting for decades, and even they say they're cutting their trips shorter or going elsewhere. One of Thailand's strongest selling points to tourists was how cheap it is, but that is slowly starting to slip away. Next is competition from cheaper alternatives. Thailand used to be the clear winner in Southeast Asia, especially for single males and guys looking for a fun holiday. These days, though, it doesn't have the same appeal as it once did, and people want to see what else is out there. And now it's got serious competition. Vietnam is becoming massive with tourists, Cambodia is trying hard to attract more, and even Japan is pulling in big crowds thanks to its weak yen. Guys who used to visit Pattaya Bangkok or Phuket every year are now saying things like, "I'll try Vietnam next time," or "I just came back from the Philippines and it was way cheaper." You can't really blame them. These places offer similar food, weather, and nightlife, but at a lower cost and often with less hassle. Vietnam especially is eating into Thailand's market. Their beaches are cleaner, their transport system is improving, and the government is throwing money at tourism. I know plenty of people that are choosing Vietnam over Thailand this winter and next year. Even long-time Thailand regulars are starting to mix it up just to see what's out there. They'll spend a few weeks in Vietnam or the Philippines seeing how it compares to Thailand. Cambodia's getting in on it too, pushing its nightlife and casinos as an alternative to Pattaya. It is not that Thailand is bad, it's just that the region hasn't caught up, and now there are more choices for tourists who used to come here every year. For a long time, Thailand didn't need to try hard, because people would always come. But those days are gone. When people realise they can get more for less just next door, Thailand's land of smile charm isn't enough on its own anymore. Next is the scams and the overcharging. Scams have always been a part of Thailand, just as many other countries, but lately people are less tolerant of that. These days, it doesn't take much to ruin someone's trip. One bad run-in or feeling ripped off and they are straight online warning others not to come. It used to be something tourists laughed off, getting overcharged by a taxi or paying too much at a market. We kind of grew to accept it because we knew it was going to happen. Now, with prices already up and social media full of bad experiences, people are losing patience with the way they are treated. When a tourist feels cheated within their first few hours, it spoils the rest of their trip. Pattaya especially has built a bit of a reputation for tourist pricing. Taxis are refusing to use the meter, the jet ski scams are still there, and bill padding still happens too often. Even though there have been crackdowns, it only takes a few bad experiences to go viral and damage the country's image. Of course, you still have the bar girl scams that have been around since the beginning of bars, but that's not really their fault. I think we can all blame the Farang if they fall for a bar girl scam. The problem for Thailand is people share their stories online, and before long, people who plan to go to Thailand start having second thoughts. That's not good for business. Most Thais are honest and hard-working, but the small number of bad people keep ruining it for everyone else. Next, the strong currency. Currency plays a bigger role than most people realise. When the Thai baht gets strong, everything costs more for foreigners. It actually makes a big difference. This year, the baht jumped over 20% against some major currencies. Europeans, Chinese, and even Australians are getting fewer baht for their money, so they naturally start cutting corners. When your local beer suddenly costs as much as it would back home, it kills that cheap paradise feeling that Thailand is famous for. I know it's a small thing, but that's what people remember. They come expecting cheaper than back home, and sometimes they end up paying more. A strong baht also hurts businesses that rely on tourists, because they can't just raise the prices to match the exchange rate. That will just scare off the customers. I've seen small bars and guest houses close because their regulars stopped coming as often. Retirees who used to live comfortably here are now dipping into savings just to keep up. Currency might sound like a small thing, but when you mix it with rising local prices, you'll start to feel it. Thailand doesn't feel like a bargain anymore, and for many people, that's enough of a reason to look elsewhere for their next trip. Next, inflation in tourist hotspots. If you spend any time in Thailand's big tourist places like Bangkok, Pattaya or Phuket, you'll notice prices have gone up a crazy amount. It's not just the fancy places either. Even low-quality hotels are charging more than they actually should. For short-term visitors, it's a bit annoying, but for long-term expats, it's starting to become a serious nightmare. You used to be able to find a decent place without much effort, but now, even the run-down places act like they are 5-star. Phuket is probably the clearest example. Rent there has gone completely nuts. Apartments that used to go for like 10,000 baht per month are now pushing 20 or more, and long-term residents are getting squeezed out. It's the same story in parts of Bangkok around Sukhumvit. Landlords know foreigners are back, so they raise prices without thinking long-term. Even cafes and gyms have jumped on the trend, adjusting prices to match what tourists will tolerate rather than what locals can afford. It is like everyone's trying to cash in while they can, without caring how it affects the people who actually live there. You can still live cheap if you step out of the hotspots, but if you want to be near the action, the nightlife, the beaches, and the craziness, then expect to pay for it. Once prices rise in tourist towns, they rarely ever come back down. It is not unbearable yet, but the days of cheap Thailand are fading fast in the places most people actually want to stay. A lot of foreigners are actually choosing different places to go in Thailand, such as around Isan. Udon Thani is a place getting popular recently. Safety concerns. When it comes to safety, Thailand still ranks fairly high for most tourists, but lately there have been more headlines about serious crimes, road accidents, and scams targeting foreigners. Even if these incidents are rare, the internet makes them look like they're happening every day. A few viral videos or news reports can do a lot of damage. In Pattaya, for example, the nightlife scene has always had its fair share of problems, but now it's under a much brighter spotlight. Everyone's got a phone out these days, so nothing stays quiet long. One clip on social media and the whole world is talking about it. Drunken fights, motorbike accidents, and petty theft get filmed and shared online constantly. Most people come here for a bit of fun and they don't get into any trouble, and then they just go home without any problems. But that side of the city's image is hard to avoid nowadays. When people think of Pattaya these days, they picture madness. That reputation keeps some people, especially families, from ever considering visiting. It's not all the media's fault either. Thailand's road safety record is genuinely one of the worst in Asia, and that affects everyone, locals and tourists. Most people that go to Thailand have a great time and stay out of trouble, but a few horror stories are what stick in people's minds. Next is the cost of living if you are staying here long term. When you live here long term, the cost of living can be a bit different than when you are just on holiday. You've got rent, visa fees, electric bills, and those weekend nights out where just for fun can quietly start mounting up. And you start to realise not everything is as cheap as it used to be. The jump in prices over the last couple of years has been wild. What used to cost 50 baht is now closer to 80 or 100, and landlords have caught on that foreigners will still pay. So like I said earlier, the rent in tourist areas have gone through the roof. Eating local still saves you money, but even the street food isn't what it used to be. And imported stuff, forget that. Cheese, wine, cereal, it's all way pricier than back home. The more Western you try to live, the faster your cash will disappear. That's something most expats figure out the hard way after the honeymoon phase wears off. The electric bills for the condo can be brutal also if you are using aircon every night. The days of living like a king on $1,000 a month are long gone. What really gets people is how fast their money starts disappearing without realising it. It's not that Thailand's suddenly expensive, but it's not the budget paradise that it used to be. Next, we've got the lovely visas. Visas in Thailand are one of those things that now feel a lot more complex if you plan on sticking around. It's gone from being a quick errand to something you have to plan your whole month around. In the past, many expats and nomads treated visas like occasional annoyances, a trip to the border or a paperwork day at immigration. Now, those options are shrinking. The Thai government has tightened visa rules, more proof of income, official documents, minimum bank balance, and they are a lot more strict at immigration when you arrive. You can feel the change at the airports and the borders. Officers ask you more questions now, and if you get one that has been having a bad day, they can easily take it out on you. Then there's a crackdown on visa runs. For years, the visa run, crossing the border to get a new stamp, was practically expected, but those loopholes are now being closed. Immigration is enforcing stricter limits on how often you can re-enter, and overstays or repeated border jumpers now come with real risks, being blacklisted, denied re-entry, or barred for a year. It makes remote work or long-term travel trickier because you can't rely on those safety nets anymore. Even people doing everything right still end up stressed, worried they will miss rules that are forever changing. There are, of course, visas you can get to stay longer, such as a DTV visa, but even then you need to meet a lot of requirements. For people living here long term, it means more planning, more costs, more stress. You've got to keep track of expiration dates, make sure your paperwork is spotless, and maybe pay extra for an agency just so you avoid the headaches. The irony is that Thailand markets itself as welcoming to foreigners, yet the visa plan feels less like they want to help you stay and more like they want to push you away. For short-term tourists, it's not a huge problem, but for anyone trying to make Thailand their base, the visa steps can be super annoying. Next, the tourist demographics. You can really see the shift in who's coming to Thailand these days, and it's changed how some places really feel. Before COVID, the country had a nice mix: backpackers, middle-aged holidaymakers, families, retirees. They was all spread out across different regions. Now, it's more polarised. In places like Phuket and Pattaya, you've got Russians and Indians that now make up a huge share of the visitors, while the big Chinese tour groups still haven't bounced back to pre-pandemic levels. It's changed the feeling in a lot of tourist places. Some places have adapted to cater almost entirely to one nationality. Menus, signs, everything, which can make the area feel less like Thailand and more like a mini version of somewhere else. They should really change the name of Walking Street in Pattaya to something more obvious like Little New Delhi or something like that. Locals don't seem too bothered, but you can tell some miss how it used to be before it got so focused on certain groups. The government talks a lot about quality tourists, but the balance is hard to find when so much of the economy depends on the volume. It's a fine line between attracting better visitors and pushing away the ones who actually keep things moving. For long-term expats, it's a mixed bag. On one hand, tourism keeps the country lively. On the other, it's exhausting to see every quiet beach or hidden cafe turning into another Instagram hotspot. Next, mixed messages about tourists. It's honestly a bit confusing being a tourist or an expat in Thailand these days, because the messages about foreigners are all over the place. On one hand, the government constantly says tourism is essential. They run big marketing campaigns, open visa waivers, and brag about how much money foreign visitors bring in. But then a week later, you'll see someone in power talking about how they want quality tourists only, code for people who spend more and complain less. It is like they want the numbers, but not the noise that comes with them. When you live here long enough, you start to notice the double standards. The quality tourist thing, it rubs some people the wrong way. It sounds like Thailand's moving away from being the friendly, come-as-you-are place it used to be towards something more exclusive. It gives off this message that only certain types of foreigners are wanted now. Yeah, it's fair to want responsible tourists, but the way it's phrased often makes backpackers and budget tourists feel unwelcome, even though they were the ones who helped put Thailand on the map in the first place. In the end, it gives off this bad feeling. The smiles are still there, but it feels like Thailand's not quite sure what kind of visitor it really wants. As somebody who loves the country, it's strange watching that shift happen. You still feel lucky to be here, but it's starting to feel a bit less welcoming. Next is the expensive airfares. Now, let's talk about the money you need to spend before actually arriving in Thailand. Getting to Thailand isn't easy or affordable as it used to be. When someone in Europe or the US looks at a ticket to Bangkok and sees it's cheaper to fly to Vietnam or Japan, they start to think maybe they should choose a different place. You can see it walking around in Pattaya on weekdays. Less tourists, empty bars, girls on their phone out of boredom. Even the Russians, who were flooding in last year, have slowed down because of the airfare cost. The tourism numbers might look okay on paper, but I wouldn't trust what Thai media says about tourism. But when you actually walk the streets, you see it yourself. It's a lot quieter. It's not something Thailand can easily fix, but it just adds another layer to the problem. When the price just to arrive already costs a stupid amount, then they will spend less once they actually get there. That's bad for local businesses, bars, and the hotels. Next, the policy red tape. One thing that's been driving people crazy lately is how unpredictable the rules in Thailand have become, and I think everyone can agree with that. It feels like every few months there's a new policy or some change. One moment cannabis shops are everywhere and everyone's relaxed about it. Then randomly the government decides it's going back to medical use only and no one knows what's allowed anymore. It might not sound like a big deal, but when people are planning holidays or moving here long term, that kind of uncertainty puts them off. Even simple things like the entry rules and the visas, they keep changing. You'll see one announcement saying tourists can stay longer, then another saying they might introduce new taxes or online forms. Some people don't mind the paperwork, but for others, it's just a headache. And for what? I've had friends fly in and get stuck at the airport because of some new online ETA system that wasn't working properly. It's frustrating when you have just spent thousands of dollars getting here and the first thing you face is a nightmare at immigration. For digital nomads, retirees, and long-stay tourists, All these changes make Thailand feel less stable. People want to relax, not constantly worry whether their visa is still valid or if some new rule is going to affect them. Other countries like Malaysia and the Philippines, they're making it easier to stay long term, and Thailand's constant policy changing is making people look elsewhere. Tourists don't like surprises, and lately Thailand has been full of them, the wrong kind. Next is the tax burdens on expats. The new tax rules have become a big talking point among expats in Thailand. For years, one of the biggest perks of living here was being able to keep your overseas income tax-free. Pensions, savings, freelance earnings, whatever. But starting in 2024 and 2025, the government announced that anyone staying in Thailand more than 180 days could be taxed on money they bring in to the country. Nobody minds paying their fair share, but most of us didn't sign up to have our retirement funds or remote income fall under the new tax laws. The confusion didn't help either. Even now, the details are not fully clear. One person says one thing, another says something else. What counts as imported income? What if you transfer savings you earned years ago? Will they double tax your pension if your home country already takes a cut? Everyone's getting different answers depending on who they talk to. It is that kind of uncertainty that's really making people nervous. When you've built your whole life here, rent, family, social life, wife, and all of a sudden you don't know what the government might decide to tax you next year. A lot of long-term residents are already planning their exit. People on chat groups and Facebook groups talk about moving to Malaysia, Vietnam, or even back home just to avoid the constant change in the rules. It's not just about the money. It's hard to build something in Thailand if everything keeps changing with more hoops to jump through. Expats feel like the government's turning against them, using them as an easy revenue source without offering anything in return. The sad part is, it's driving away exactly the kind of foreigners Thailand should want to keep. Retirees with steady pensions, digital nomads spending locally. Most of us aren't rich. We just wanted a relaxed life in a place we loved. But between the rising cost and this new tax mess, a lot of expats are looking at their options and realizing Thailand's not the easygoing haven it used to be. Now we've got the dual pricing. Dual pricing in Thailand is one of those things that rub a lot of foreigners the wrong way, but some foreigners just don't care. You can be at a national park or a museum, and the sign clearly says, Thai 40 baht, foreigner 200 baht. At first, it's almost funny, but then you realize it's everywhere. Temples, attractions, even some hospitals and public transport now have different rates. It's not the money itself, it's about the feeling that you are being charged extra just for not being local. Can you imagine the uproar if certain other countries did this for certain people? Locals will tell you it's fair because foreigners usually earn more, but that argument doesn't really hold up when you are an expat. You are paying rent, you are paying taxes, and you are living on a fixed income. It's especially rough for retirees or long-stay residents who have been here for years and they still have to pay the tourist price. You could be married to a Thai, own a business, you could even speak the language, but it doesn't matter. The rules are the same. No matter how much they contribute, they'll always be treated as outsiders. What's worse is that the gap has widened lately. Some places used to charge maybe double, but now it's 5 or 10 times at the local rate. The Bangkok train system recently introduced a local-only discount and foreigners were excluded entirely. even if they have lived and worked here. Stuff like that just adds up to the frustration. It sends the message that foreigners are good for spending money, but not really part of the community. Over time, you just learn to live with it, but it does change how people feel about staying here long term. No one likes feeling like a walking ATM every time they go out. It's a small thing on paper, but it quietly pushes people towards countries where the rules feel a bit more equal. So all these things connect: the rising costs, stricter rules, bad press, and lost trust. None of them alone would destroy tourism, but together they've been pushing away at Thailand's biggest strength: being easy, affordable, and fun. Pattaya shows it better than anywhere else in my opinion. The crowds are just not there anymore. Bars close earlier, and locals talk about the good old days more than the future. You can still have an amazing time there, but it's not the same feeling as it used to be. Tourism isn't dead, it's just tired. People still come, but they spend less. They stay for a shorter time, and they look around more before booking. If Thailand wants to bounce back, it has to make things simple again. Fewer rules, better value, and a genuine welcome. That's what built its reputation in the first place. Without that, the land of smiles risks turning into another stop people visit once and then move on from. If you ask me, I strongly believe that next year Vietnam will be the main place people are going, and not Thailand.